Hey guys, tonight we slip into the shadows of a royal palace, the northern Greek kingdom of Macedon, where flickering oil lamps cast long patterns across stone walls. And the air smells faintly of olives, dust, and a little too much wine. It's 356 BCE, and you are standing in the town of Pella, capital of a rising kingdom. The queen, Olympias, is giving birth to a child who will end up becoming one of history's most talked about figures, Alexander. You probably won't survive this story if you try to keep up with him in real life, so don't even think about it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now where you are. I like imagining little pinpricks of light all over the world, people settling in at different hours, yet sharing this moment together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, the boy's arrival is marked, at least according to later storytellers, by omens dramatic enough to make a Hollywood screenwriter roll their eyes. They say the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the grand sanctuary across the Aegean, burned down on the very night Alexander was born. That coincidence was read as a cosmic sign. One great light extinguished so another could rise. You imagine? Midwives whispering, priests scribbling, and someone muttering that this baby had better do something spectacular, because the world just lost a wonder. Olympias herself was not exactly the picture of a mild-mannered queen. Raised in Epirus, she came from a lineage of rulers claiming descent from Achilles himself. She practiced mystery cult rituals involving snakes, which means that young Alexander may have grown up with pet serpents slithering around the palace far from your average childhood pets. Historians still argue whether these stories about Olympias and her snakes are exaggerated propaganda or based on reality. Either way, it added a mystical aura to Alexander's birthright. His father, Philip II, was a seasoned warrior king. Think of him as the kind of dad who could build an empire. Before breakfast, then scold you for not polishing your armor. He'd reformed the Macedonian army, turning a scrappy hill people into one of the most efficient military machines of the ancient world. And here was this baby, wrapped in linen, already with destiny looming larger than any cradle as you wander. Mentally, through those palace halls, you sense the tension. Macedon was not some backwater, though Athenians like to sneer at it that way, but a rising power. Philip had already set his sights on dominating the fractured Greek city-states. Little Alexander was born into a house buzzing with ambition, power struggles, and a constant smell of polished bronze. The omens didn't stop with Artemis's temple. They said Philip dreamed that he sealed his wife's womb with a lion emblazoned. Signet, a rather unsubtle metaphor, predicting a son with a lion's courage. Olympias reportedly dreamed of thunder and lightning, Zeus himself visiting her bed. These tales, retold again and again, blur the line between bedtime story and state propaganda. Still, here's a quirky tidbit. According to one version, Philip missed Alexander's birth because he was off besieging a city. Imagine being too busy conquering to attend the delivery room. Priorities, right? You get the feeling Alexander's entire life would be marked by that. Same rhythm family moments interrupted by war drums. As a baby, he likely toddled through courtyards where soldiers sparred, diplomats argued, and courtiers gossiped. He wasn't just some royal toddler eating honey cakes and playing with carved wooden toys, though he probably did that too. From the start, his life was infused with the expectation that he was meant for something more, something bordering on divine. Historians still argue whether these birth legends were crafted later, once Alexander became famous, or whether people really believed them at the time. Either way, as you let your mind drift, you can picture the scene, smoke rising from the temple in Ephesus, a baby's first cry in Pella, and whispers rippling across the Greek world that a storm of history had just begun. And while you may feel cozy now, curled up in bed, keep in mind Alexander's early cradle was less about lullabies and more about the thunder of destiny shaking the rafters. You can almost hear it if you listen closely. Asterisk, you picture the boy a few years older now, darting across the palace courtyard with wild curls bouncing and eyes that rarely stop moving. Alexander doesn't just walk, he struts like he owns the place. Which, In a way, he sort of does. Childhood in Macedon is not soft. You're not tucked into bed with teddy bears. You're dragged out into the hills to ride ponies that buck, wrestle with bigger boys, and get scolded if you can't throw a spear straight, Philip. Ever the proud general ensures his son is raised tougher than boiled leather. The Macedonian royal household is less storybook castle and more boot camp with chandeliers. Tutors parade through, teaching him letters, numbers, and the kind of Homeric poetry that makes bedtime stories sound like epic battle chants. Imagine drifting off to sleep with someone reciting lines about Achilles slaughtering Trojans. Not exactly. Good night, Moon. One mainstream historical fact, from an early age. Alexander absorbed the Iliad like it was his personal manual. Later, he even carried a copy annotated by Aristotle himself. But as a boy, he's already memorizing passages, quoting lines, and pretending to be Achilles while other kids are still figuring out how to skip stones. Quirky tidbit, there's a story that young Alexander once wrangled a horse no one else could tame. The beast, named Bucephalus, reared and snorted, scaring off the grown men. Alexander noticed the animal was afraid of its own shadow. Cleverly, he turned the horse toward the sun so the shadow fell behind them, calming the stallion he mounted. It rode it and earned gasps from the crowd. Philip supposedly muttered, "My son, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions, for Macedon is too small for you. No pressure, right? You can imagine being 10 years old and your dad basically tells you to conquer the world before dessert." Now, here's where historians still argue. Was this story true, or was it polished later into a PR stunt? A boy calming a wild horse with the wisdom of a grown man sounds almost too perfect to rehearsed. But whether it happened exactly that way or not, Bucephalus becomes Alexander's lifelong companions, sort of like if you had a golden retriever that could also trample armies. Meanwhile, Olympias doesn't let him forget the divine side of his pedigree. She whispers to him that he descends from heroes, that Zeus might be his real father. Imagine growing up with a mom who insists you're part god. Some kids are told they're special because they drew a good picture. Alexander is told he's literally in the bloodline of immortals. That'll do wonders for your self-esteem, maybe also give you a little arrogance problem later. You watch him in the palace hall, nose in a scroll, trying to make sense of Homer's battles. Then, in a blink, he's outside, hurling a javelin farther than the other boys, or running beside Bucephalus with unshakable focus. His whole childhood is this back and forth between dreamy lessons about philosophy and very real bruises from combat training. He's not coddled, though. Philip, who's seen enough war to fill 3 lifetimes, knows his son must be hardened. He surrounds Alexander with older commanders, lets him listen in on war councils, and occasionally drags him along on military campaigns. Imagine being 12 and tagging along to a siege like it's take your kid to work day. Other kids get cookies and milk. Alexander gets catapults and bloodied armor. One night, as you drift further, you can almost hear the sound of lyres in the banquet halls, echoing through marble corridors. Wine flows, courtiers gossip, and in a quiet corner, a boy sharpens his mind on stories older than the palace itself. He dreams of Troy, of gods and heroes, of a life bigger than any shadow. You get the sense he's already restless, even as a child, as though the world around him is too small to contain his pulse, and just maybe. You glance at him as he slips into the torchlight, he knows it too. You slip forward a little in time, and suddenly the boy is no longer just a child chasing horses, he's seated cross-legged in a quiet chamber. A furrow on his brow as if thinking too hard for someone still barely into his teens. The reason? A man in a plain robe, with sharp eyes and a beard that refuses to behave, is speaking to him in patient, measured tones. This is Aristotle, the philosopher who becomes his most famous tutor. Yes, that Aristotle, the one whose footnotes basically shaped half of Western philosophy. And here he is, teaching an awkward teenager how to think. The setting is Mysa, a leafy retreat in Macedon, chosen precisely to avoid the chaos of palace politics. You picture it. Shaded groves, birds chattering in the branches, and marble benches, where discussions range from ethics to zoology. It's not Hogwarts, but it has that air of secret learning. little removed from the everyday world. One solid historical fact: Aristotle gave Alexander lessons in rhetoric, philosophy, science, medicine, and most crucially politics. He didn't just teach him what to think, but how to argue, how to pick apart an idea like you might peel a fig. You can almost see Alexander, chin tilted, trying out counter-arguments, debating ethics while also plotting what kind of armor looks most heroic. Now, for a quirky tidbit, Aristotle apparently gave Alexander a passion for biology. Not in the microscope in the lab way, but in the send me weird animals way. Later, when Alexander went on campaign, he'd actually ship exotic creatures back to his old tutor. It's almost like a kid mailing postcards home. Imagine Aristotle's delight or horror when a crate arrives containing a half-angry baboon or some lizard from the edges of the known world. Sort of like being a pen pal with someone whose idea of a souvenir is a live crocodile. Here's where scholars still argue: did Aristotle plant the seed of Alexander's belief in cultural superiority, the idea of spreading Greek ideals everywhere? He went to, or was Alexander already wired for conquest by his royal upbringing? Some say the philosopher's lessons gave him intellectual justifications for empire. Others suggest Alexander cherry-picked what he liked: ethics, science, and discarded the inconvenient bits: moderation, humility. Knowing what comes later, you might lean toward the second option. As you linger in this grove, you sense the tension between student and teacher. Aristotle speaks of balance, of reason, of tempering desires. Alexander, meanwhile, stares at the horizon, wondering what lies beyond it. The kid is bright, yes, but he's also restless. Philosophy is fine, but adventure is better. You almost hear him mutter, "All this wisdom is great, but when do we get to the part with swords?" Still, the influence sticks. He learns about Homer not just as poetry, but as a manual for living. Aristotle encourages him to see Achilles not merely as a hero, but as a warning: a man undone by rage. Whether Alexander ever listened is another matter. Later historians like to imagine him carrying Aristotle's lessons in his breast pocket. But knowing Alexander, probably tucked them behind the Iliad and gave them side-eye whenever they contradicted his impulses. Picture a dusk in Mesa, torches flicker. Aristotle leans forward, speaking of moderation, of the golden mean. Alexander, half smiling, toys with a dagger, not out of malice, but sheer energy. Outside, the cicadas drone, and the stars begin their endless glow. You realize this is the paradox. A boy schooled in the wisdom of restraint, yet destined to ignore at the moment ambition whispers. Still, you can't help but be charmed. He's not yet the conqueror. He's just a teenager, bored by lectures, fascinated by myths, eager to prove himself. You almost want to shake Aristotle's hand and say, "Good luck, buddy, you'll need it." Morning fog clings to the Boeotian plain like breath on a mirror, and you ease Bucephalus into a calm walk so the horse's chest doesn't flare steam too early and spook the line. You're older. No longer the restless boy in Aristotle's grove, but not yet the legend posters would be printed about if posters existed. Philip's army stretches in a precise geometry across the field near a little place called Chaeronea. It's 338 BCE, and the world has that pre-battle quiet that makes even birds reconsider their schedules. You taste metal on the air, old dust, in your throat, and the leather bite of your reins where your gloves have worn thin. The Macedonian machine is arranged like a well-practiced sentence. On one side, Philip with his veterans. On your side, the left wing, the companion cavalry, gleaming with gold fittings that try to pretend war is elegant. Between you both, the long hedge of the Sarissa phalanx men bristling with pikes, so long they could pick fruit from a second-floor balcony. Mainstream historical fact taps your shoulder here. Philip's reformed phalanx, armed with those 18 to 22-foot Sarissas, had changed the game in Greece. Close order, disciplined push, a walking wall of iron-tipped thorn. Across the plain, the Thebans and Athenians wait, their shields bright with city emblems, their confidence bright with city pride. You can name the pieces by sight: the famed Theban sacred band on their right. 200 lovers paired shield to shield, a unit whose reputation travels ahead like a herald. The Athenians anchor the other side, citizens who stayed up late, arguing about strategy and democracy, and are now here to prove both can stand in a field. Someone murmurs the old line about Greeks fighting Greeks while Persia laughs, but the murmur is brief. There's no room for philosophy when the signalers start to move. You shift in the saddle and glance at Philip. He rides the length of his line with a relaxed posture that fools no one. He's the kind of calm that oozes from scars. He lifts his hand easy, unshowy, and the phalanx steps forward, pikes leveling in a single, unbroken sweep. Somewhere behind you, a trumpeter tests a note and then nails the call, clear as a mountain stream. Bucephalus tosses his head once, then settles. You pat his neck and whisper the same nonsense you've whispered since you were a kid. Joke 1. You promise him an extra nose scratch if he doesn't trample any important diplomats. The first contact is sound before it's sight, wood on wood, bronze on ash, the grinding of shields, the scrape of sandals, as formations adjust. Philip angles his wing back slowly, almost lazily, as if he's daydreaming about lunch. The Athenian line leans after him, pulled forward by pride or hope or simple momentum. Historians still argue whether Philip's backward drift was a risky feint, retreat, or an opportunistic response to terrain and pressure, but to the men watching, it looks like choice. He's tugging them out of shape, thread by thread. Your turn comes when the Theban right, intent on pressing your phalanx neighbors, shows you the sliver of a door. Your companions are heavy cavalry, the smash and thread needle that finds seams and turns them into rips. You raise your ziston, the long cavalry spear, and the line around you does the same in a shiver of points. Now, you sit quietly, 'cause shouting is for people who don't mean a tand. He'll Bucephalus forward into a canter that has been rehearsed 100 afternoons on Macedonian hills. The ground here dips and then firms the perfect runway. Your men fan slightly, then stitch back together, like a flock of starlings deciding on a shape. The shock when you meet the Theban edge is half physics, half belief, your momentum, their brace, your training, their resolve. Spears crack, some shatter, few men in the front ranks stumble, get dragged forward by the push of bodies behind them, then regain their feet because that is what lines do. You pivot the companions into the angle, driving a wedge where shields have lost contact. Bucephalus knows the dance, stepping sideways when you need him to step, lunging when your thigh asks. The world becomes bright fragments, bronze boss, wet grass, a face you'll never see again. Your own breath counting time. Someone thrusts at your thigh. Turn the point with your greave and answer with your spear, but a quick, rude tap that says, "Not today." Joke 2. You make a mental note to write a thank you letter to the blacksmith who made that greave. Mainstream. Fact, again with its ledger. Later accounts credit the left wing, your wing, with cracking the Theban position. Some say you personally engaged near the sacred band, whose last stand would become the stuff of solemn memorials. The record blurs. The band was annihilated, but whether your companions dealt the mortal blow or whether the Macedonian phalanx did it in grinding, tragic inches remains a debate that keeps scholars warm on winter evenings. What is not debated, the Theban right gave way. Once it bent, the pressure rippled. But a bend in a battle line often becomes a break. You catch sight of one Theban, whose helmet crest is bent sideways, the red dye bleeding in the sweat, and for a second, he looks like a rooster who's lost a fight but refuses to admit it. Hey, he lifts his spear anyway. You feel the odd tug of respect that soldiers sometimes feel for the other side, not romance. Just the recognition of courage and the same currency you're spending. Later, when you stand over the field, you'll understand Philip's reputed words at the sacred band's bodies. Perish any man who suspects that these men either did or suffered anything unseemly. Quirky tidbit, yes, but also a window. The Macedonians could admire what they destroyed. A runner splashes past, there's water in the low ground now. Trampled puddles becoming slick ceiling that Philip has sprung the trap. His line, drawn back like a bowstring, snaps forward. The Athenians, pulled out and panting, find Macedonian steel arriving with ugly punctuality. Your success on the left means their flank is now naked to a roomer with hooves. You signal the companions' wheel, and you rake along their side like a comb through a snarl. It's quick then. Not the fighting that always feels like it lasts forever, but the math. Once the line loses coherence, a battle becomes an audit. Men drop shields to run faster. Others plant their feet and become stones in a river of retreat. The hill just beyond the town wears a fringe of fugitives, and you let most of them go. There's no glory in scraping the barrel. Philip signals recall with a flag you can spot. From a lifetime away, you pull your men into a tidy crescent and let their breathing settle. There's a strange, hollow quiet that follows the last clamor, like a bell that keeps ringing in your bones after the sound stops. You ride slowly through the churned earth. The field is a palimpsest grass, then mud, then trampled patterns that will green again in spring, as if none of this happened. Somewhere a sling stone lies half-buried, ready to make a farmer curse. At harvest? Joke 3. Future archaeologists will find it and mislabel it decorative paperweight. 4th century BCE. Philip approaches, face streaked with dust, one eye narrowed against the sting. He doesn't rush the moment, because he understands that praise tastes better when not gulped. He looks you over not just for wounds, but for the thing leaders. Watch for after first blood. Did you break? You didn't? He nods once, slow. There's pride in it, and relief, and a tiny flare of something like calculation. This will be useful. In front of the officers, he says, enough to stamp the message. The prince did well. In private later, he might squeeze your shoulder and mutter, you led like a Macedonian. Coming from him, that's a crown. Historians still argue whether Chaeronea truly belonged to you, or to Philip's feint, whether your charge was the hinge or a well-timed cog. The debate is tidy and will survive in ink far longer than most footprints here. What you know tonight is simpler. When the window opened, you moved. When the pressure came, you held. When the signal rose, you stopped. That combination impulse, discipline, obedience, will become your signature as much as any coin portrait. As evening slides over the plain, the camp lamps prick on. The murmur returns, the one that lives in every army after every battle. A mix of inventory and storytelling, and the gentle scavenging for food. You unsaddle Bucephalus, rub the sweat from his withers, and press your forehead to his for a breath. The way you always do, he snorts, unimpressed by history. The Iliad is tucked under your pillow tonight. Aristotle's notes folded between pages you haven't read in months. You fall asleep to the sound of hammers as Smith straightened bent points for whatever comes next. And whatever comes next. You can feel it turning already, the shift from sons proving themselves to fathers worrying about succession, from shared victory to the complicated arithmetic of credit. Somewhere in Pella, the palace corridors remember the tread of rival feet. Somewhere in your chest, ambition paces, measuring distances it has only just learned it can cross. Asterisk the palace at Pella. Smells of cedar beams and roasted lamb, though beneath the perfume of banquet smoke lingers a sharper scent, distrust. You're back from Chaeronea, laurels still fresh enough to wilt on helmets, but the walls have shifted since you left. Philip is in high command, master of Greece now, but his household is a different battlefield, quieter, subtler, lined with silk curtains instead of ceresis. You walk through marble halls that echo with your footsteps and think of Aristotle's lessons, how every polis has its factions, how envy can be sharper than iron. Your own mother Olympias coils through these rooms like the sacred snakes of Epirus she loves, whispering of destiny and betrayal in the same breath. She tells you Philip's new marriage to the much younger Cleopatra Eurydice insults her, and by extension, you nod, because agreeing is easier than unraveling the tangle of pride and politics. Still, the air tightens every time you enter. The throne room mainstream historical fact presents itself cleanly. Philip did remarry. It's in 337 BCE, taking Cleopatra Eurydice, niece of his general Attalus. The wedding was lavish. During the feast, Attalus toasted for a legitimate Macedonian heir, pointedly excluding you. Its bloodline, though royal, was spiced with Olympias Epirot heritage. You remember the silence after his words? The sting in your palm from gripping your cup too hard? And your own sharp retort that left half the hall frozen. Some sources say you shouted that you were already legitimate and fit to rule. Others claim you hurled your cup and stormed away, Historians still argue whether you left Macedonia at that moment or later.
Oh.
But most agree there was a rupture. You. Retreating to your mother's Epirote kin, Olympias herself slipping into exile. For a time, it seemed Philip's glittering empire had a hairline crack running right through his family. Quirky tidbit: Philip, for all his legendary generalship, was also a man who limped from an old leg wound, had lost an eye to an arrow, and still kept collecting wives as if they were tax exemptions. Counting them is a historian's headache. Olympias was one among several, though easily the most dramatic. You can imagine the awkwardness of family dinners if reality TV had existed. Call it Keeping Up with the Argides. You stalk out into the courtyard one night and watch the torches bend in the wind. The soldiers still salute you, still murmur about Chaeronea, but the whispers now coil differently. Would Philip sideline his son for a new heir? Would Olympias plot in shadows to ensure your future? You're 19, trained to break phalanxes, not to play chess with relatives. And yet here you are, armor-polished but irrelevant, while politics claws at your back. Philip tries reconciliation, calls you into his chambers, gestures to the map of Greece, freshly inked with alliances. His voice is warm enough. He praises your cavalry strike, your discipline, but beneath the warmth you hear the steel. He will rule as long as he breathes, and you will wait your turn. You nod, because what else can you do? Outside, the torches hiss. Inside, ambition paces like a caged panther. And then, 336 BCE arrives with a shiver. A wedding again, this time for Cleopatra, Philip's daughter, not his new wife. Guests gather in Asia, Macedon's old capital, where colonnades gleam. And musicians tune lyres. You ride at Philip's side in the procession, the streets draped with garlands, the people cheering their king, the conqueror of Greece. The king walks into the theater unguarded, perhaps too confident in his victories, perhaps simply tired of suspicion and then chaos, quick as lightning. Pausanias, a bodyguard, lunges forward and drives a blade into Philip's side. The king collapses before the crowd, blood soaking his robes. Triumph turned to tragedy in an instant. Mainstream fact again: Philip II, master of Macedon, is assassinated at Aija. 336 BCE. The killer is cut down immediately as he tries to flee, and the theater erupts in screams. The scene is burned into your memory. The king sprawled on marble, the wedding garlands stained. The air thick with shock. Historians still argue whether Pausanias acted alone out of personal grievance or whether the conspiracy reached higher. Some whisper Olympias had a hand clearing the stage for you. Others blame Persian gold, or Attalus. Or even you, though the latter accusation is usually served with a nervous laugh. Because what son kills his father and then mourns so publicly? Joke 1. Apparently in Macedon, the list of suspects is longer than the guest list. The next morning, Pella is different. The corridors no longer echo with Philip's tread, but with the shuffle of courtiers hurrying to pledge allegiance. Soldiers cluster around you, not Philip. The crown awkward, heavy, encrusted with gems that catch the light like eyes suddenly belongs to you. At 20, you are king of Macedon. The title rolls across your shoulders. At once exhilarating and suffocating, your first days are less about vision and more about survival. Rivals lurk in every corner. Attalus, still powerful, looms as a threat. You send assassins before he sends his own. The sons of other wives hover, possible pretenders, and soon their silence too, some exiled, some executed. It's cold. Math, the kind that ensures tomorrow arrives. You feel the weight in your chest, but you know hesitation is an invitation. Olympias returns. Triumphant to Pella. She claims to have placed a golden crown on Philip's corpse and whispered prophecies over your future. You don't ask if she planned more than prophecies. Instead, you let her presence stabilize your claim, though you sense the danger of being forever her son rather than your own man. Quirky. Anecdote slips in here. Some sources claim Olympias celebrated Philip's death by hanging garlands over the assassin's body or placing a crown on his head, as if the murderer were a hero. Whether true or not, it's the kind of detail that lingers in gossip, It's a sort that makes historians wrinkle their noses. And so you stand one night on the balcony at Pella, as the new king, watching the fires of the city burn steady against the horizon. The court is hushed now, but in the silence you hear drums not real, but the imagined beat of campaigns to come. Greece has bowed to Macedon, but Persia, vast Persia, waits across the water. You trace its outline on the map and feel ambition stretch its wings. The torch beside you sputters, and you smile faintly. You are Alexander, son of Philip, student of Aristotle, writer of Bucephalus. Macedon is yours, but Macedon is not enough. Joke 2. You tell yourself to enjoy the peace while it lasts roughly. The length of a fig harvest. Joke 3. Somewhere in Athens. Philosophers are already sharpening their quills to write about how a teenager just inherited half the known world. You hope they at least spell your name correctly. You close your eyes. Let the night air brush your face and think, this is only the beginning. Asterisk. You stand in the throne room as if it's a ship's deck in a sudden squallows, rolling toward. You like waves, hands lifted, voices swearing loyalty, because the alternative is unthinkable. The diadem sits unfamiliar on your brow. You can almost feel the weight of Philip's fingerprints still pressed into the metal. You tell yourself to breathe, to count that breath like a cadence on the march. Macedon is yours, but it's the kind of gift that bites if you hold it wrong. Your first move is not poetry. It's paperwork sharpened to a blade. You call the army assembly, speak to the officers by name, and promise them what soldiers want most: purpose and pay. Mainstream historical fact walks in with a nod within weeks of Philip's assassination in 336 BCE. You secured recognition from the Macedonian army and then moved to be confirmed as hegemon of the Greek coalition formed at Corinth. In other words, keep calm, carry on, and yes, we're still going to Asia. Before Asia, though, the map glowers north. Thessaly eyes your youth. The Amphictyonic Council at Thermopylae waits to see whether Macedon is still a wall or merely a rumor of one. You don't wait for rumors. You saddle Bucephalus at dawn and take the royal road south with a column moving too fast for polite geography. In a day's hard push, you're at the Vale of Tempe. In 2, you're in the Thessalian plain, where the cities discover that speed is a kind of argument. You choose the winning side with a flurry of seals and smiles. You accept their oaths without gloating because there's a lot more map left to soothe. Joke 1. You mentally add speedrun. Diplomacy to your resume. Thermopylae comes next. The narrow gate where old Spartan glory still whispers in the stones. The council nods. The paperwork stacks. And suddenly, you're not merely king of Macedon, but leader of a Hellenic crusade that your father dreamed and you fully intend to finish. You ride on to Corinth, where the League ratifies you as strategos. Autocrator, the fancy Greek for the guy in charge of this whole show. Someone proposes a crown of gold. You accept the compliment and the quiet message that comes with it. Don't you dare falter. Historians still argue whether the Greek cities embraced you out of fear or calculation. Were they charmed by your swift courtesies, or simply pinned to the board by Macedonian pikes? The sources, many of them written long after the fact, massage pride into the narrative. You keep your own counsel. Admiration is welcome. Obedience is required. Then the north grumbles. Thracian tribes test the fence and Illyrian princes measure your spine. You turn the army uphill, toward Mount Hemus in 335 BCE, where the wind tastes of pine and iron and the roads remember wolves. At the ridge a Thracian wagon wall squats across the track, locals trusting gravity as their ally. You set the phalanx. Braced for rolling timber, give the order, and when the wagons thunder down, your men open lanes like a zipper, shields catching, ranks closing again with the neat click of discipline. Mainstream fact, the battle at Mount Hemus is your first northern statement. Calm, under trick. Order under surprise. Beyond the ridge, the Tripoli retreat toward the Danube's broad cold mirror. You follow because hesitation here reads as weakness. Rafts lash together. The river grumbles under the weight of men and ambition. At dawn you cross, not to hold the far bank forever, but to teach it your name. Skirmish flashes, breaks, dissolves. Then sacrifice white bulls, garlands. A libation to the river god who did not swallow you whole. Quirky tidbit. Some chronicles whisper you founded Alexandropolis among the Medi after one of these. Northern campaign's a city that flickers in the record like a campfire and then goes dark. Was it a real foundation, or just a boast with? A boundary ditch. The debate is lively and the archaeology stingy. West again, because Illyria won't be left out of the welcome tour. Cletus and Glaucius tuck themselves into the rocky redoubt of Pelion, and you find your army fenced by mountains, an enemy smirking down. In time hemorrhaging like a bad metaphor, you perform one of those drills your officers will talk about. Intense for years, you form a hollow square, trumpets sounding signals like punctuation. The phalanx wheels and countermarches under taunts and stones. Shields ringing in measured music until the army slips through the narrow like a snake shedding fear. Night falls. You double back with torches, hit the passes where the enemy sleeps. Smug, and by morning, they're gone from Pelion, as if a gust of logic blew them away. Joke 2. You file this under things to reenact when inventors finally create portable fog machines. Back in Pella, the courtiers count the days and rumors. Olympias burns incense and opinions in equal measure. You send letters ahead of Eucul. Chris promises that the throne is steady and the paymaster punctual. When you ride into the city, the army's cheer is less a roar than a low. Confident hum, the sound of men who have tested their commanders, reflexes and found them reassuring. Then the note goes sour.
Ow, so.
Thebes has been listening to its own bravado and to Persian whispers, and decides Macedon's grip may not be iron after all. You're still wiping river water from your boots when the report reaches you. Theban exiles stir the pot. The garrison is penned in the Cadme. The city smells rebellion like wine and wants a cup. You do not convene a committee. You march 7 days from the north to Thebes, a pace that makes messengers blush. The road unspools under your feet like a dare. Along the way, you keep the mechanics of power humming. Ambassadors ride ahead with offers of lenience. Quartermasters pry grain from reluctant barns. A courier arrives from Athens with a letter that is mostly nervous throat-clearing. It into your belt unread. It's the only sentence that matters right now is written in hoof marks. On the road, you let your mind scratch at one question like a dog at a door. Mercy or example? Historians still argue whether you decided Thebes' fate while still in the saddle, or whether the decision hardened only when you saw the walls and heard the insults. One school paints you as policy incarnate, cold, efficient, using shock to cauterize Greece. Another insists you were reactive, angered by stubbornness, then trapped by a cascade of consequences. You suspect both are true in unfashionable amounts. Leaders are not equations. They are weather. At camp on the 2nd. Night. You eat bread that tastes like the bag it rode in, and wash it down with wine that would earn a cautious shrug from any Athenian. You unroll your blanket, slip the dagger and the Iliadur to old habits under your head, and stare at the stars that used to mean myths and now mean roots. Bucephalus sighs nearby, patient, irreplaceable. You think of Aristotle's golden. Mean and smile because you rarely see it from where you stand. Joke 3. You promise the philosophers a postcard from wherever moderation lives, if you ever pass through. Morning will bring Thebes' walls into hard focus. Your scouts will sketch gates, your engineers will eye ditches, your companions will test their girths and grin bravely at nothing. The crown has settled a little more comfortably on your brow, not because it's lighter, but because the muscles of your neck have learned the weight. You are 20, already older than your years by miles, and the map keeps behaving like an invitation you can't decline. You run a finger along the road line to the south, feel the grit of sand grind under your nail, and hear in it the quiet. Arithmetic that now governs your life. Move fast, hit hard, pay promptly, pardon cleverly, punish seldom but when you do, make the story walk by itself. Thebes is about to learn which lines of that arithmetic are flexible and which are carved in basalt. Somewhere behind the ridge, sun you haven't earned yet, climbs toward your day. You tie the diadem tighter, pull on your gloves, and step into the saddle. Macedon rides when you move, and tonight the world intends to sleep lightly. Thebes rises out of the plain like a dare, its double walls bristling with defiance, its citizens shouting so loudly you can almost feel the spittle fly from their lips. They call you tyrant, usurper, the boy king who won't last a season. You reign in Bucephalus, just out of bowshot, tilt your head, and for a moment you admire the consistency of human optimism. After all, it takes a certain boldness to insult someone who just marched nearly 200 miles in under 2 weeks, simply to stand at your gates. Mainstream. Historical fact lands like a drumbeat. In 335 BCE, you encircled Thebes with frightening speed, cutting off supplies and sending out terms. Those terms submit, pay reparations, host a garrison, were not unreasonable by the standards of Greek politics. But Theban pride was iron, hammered on too many anvils to bend quietly. They wanted you gone, preferably in pieces. The first skirmish is almost comical in its timing. As your envoys are still finishing their careful speech, Theban cavalry bursts out of a side gate, hoping to catch your guard off balance. They gallop straight into your advanced scouts, who handle it with such neat efficiency that the entire episode feels staged for morale. You can almost hear the cosmic laugh track. Joke 1. You imagine some future dramatist turning this into slapstick. With horses sliding around like they're on banana peels, you allow 3 days for negotiation, partly to test Theban resolve, partly to give other Greek cities time to watch. They do watch Athens peeking through its philosophical curtains, Corinth shifting uneasily on its seat, Sparta pretending it's above all this, while oiling its spears in case. Historians still argue whether you offered lenience sincerely or merely performed magnanimity for effect. Either way, the result is the same. Thebes slammed the door, nailed it shut, and shouted louder. So you shrugged, and you signaled the phalanx forward. The battle is sharp, chaotic, a clash of shields and stubbornness. Your men surge into the gap as one of Thebes' gates splinters under combined assault. House by house, alley by alley, the Macedonian tide rolls in. There are moments of valor, the sacred band fights to the last, shoulder to shoulder, a brotherhood of warriors who refuse to run. Their fall is recorded with a kind of tragic respect, even in your own camp. Quirky tidbit drifts in with the dust. Some ancient writers say you spared the poet. Pindar's house out of admiration, a lone structure standing amid ruin. Like a library that insisted beauty should survive even in rubble. Whether you did this from genuine cultural piety, or because it made a good story to export back to Athens, well, even you might not be sure. The aftermath is not comedy. Thebes collapses, its people slaughtered or enslaved, its city razed. Mainstream. Fact again. You handed the fate of Thebes to the Greek allies in the League, who voted overwhelmingly for destruction. But let's not dodge at true presence, and approval made it possible. Thebes was erased, a lesson scrawled across Greece in fire. The message was clear: rebel at your peril. Thebes' smoking ruins became your business card, and yet walking through the wreckage, you still feel the bite of silence. You hear the cries that cut off too quickly, the stone walls still radiating heat. You are 20, yes, but you are not immune to the weight of consequence. You wonder whether the gods note these choices, whether they tally them like merchants tally coin. You wonder whether Philip would have done the same. Then you shake the thought away because wondering is a luxury leaders can't afford, and you still have Asia to conquer? Your speed is once again the marvel. While the Theban smoke still curls, you dispatch envoys to Corinth. Athens, every corner of the League, bearing both warning and reassurance. The war with Persia is still on. Your leadership is intact, and yes, the payroll is being handled. Athens swallows its terror, votes for peace, and hides behind speeches about freedom while quietly sending you envoys with olive branches. Sparta predictably does nothing except sharpen its silence. In your tent at night, the Iliad lies open. Again, the story of Achilles and Hector, staring at you like a mirror. You trace the lines, mouthing words that are older than your grief, older than your triumph. Historians still argue whether your affection for Homer was genuine devotion or political theater. But you know it's neither, and both it is. Fuel, it is ritual, It is comfort when the world you are making feels too jagged to hold. The army, for its part, is euphoric. They have crushed a major city, followed you into peril and back, and emerged rich in plunder and reputation. Their faith in you grows teeth. You recognize the danger of that faith. It demands you keep providing victories or risk losing it. A hungry army devours not only its rations, but its leader if disappointed. So you let them celebrate, you distribute. Spoils fairly. And you prepare for the campaign your father promised. Persia. Quirky image sticks in your mind. A Theban child's toy. A wooden horse lying broken in the dirt after the siege. You picked it up once, turned it over in your hand, then set it down again because you couldn't afford to let sentiment leak into the cracks. Still, you remember it. Even now, you see it whenever your fingers are idle. A joke too, you think. To yourself that someone should really invent therapists. But instead, you've got philosophers and war. Thebes' destruction echoes far beyond Boeotia. Across the Aegean, in the marble halls of Persia, envoys scurry to report that Macedon is still frighteningly efficient, its boy king more storm than child. Darius III, the Persian king, stirs uneasily on his throne. He may have thought Philip's death bought him time. Now he sees it bought him an opponent even more impatient. The Greeks themselves, for all their hatred and fear, close ranks. Corinth, you convene them again, their faces pale, their voices cautious. They confirm you once more as leader of the crusade, and this time the oaths taste less like courtesy and more like surrender. The alliance is real, or at least it behaves like reality, which is close enough for your purposes. Back at Pella, you allow yourself one evening of calm. The palace walls smell of cedar. Your mother burns her offerings in the shrine, and the wine poured is finally of decent quality. Bucephalus snorts in the courtyard, restless as always, eager for longer roads. You stroke his mane and whisper that soon enough he'll see the wide plains of Asia, and then, before the moon has finished its cycle, you are gone again. To the docks, to the ships, to the wind that blows east. You will carry Thebes' ghost with you across the Aegean, because ghosts have their uses. They remind you not of mercy or cruelty, but of necessity, the engine that keeps you riding forward. Past hesitation, past remorse. And joke 3. Mutter to yourself as the ships creak, I should probably invest in sandals with better arch support. Conquering the world is hard on the feet. The sails billow, the horizon beckons, and Thebes fades behind you like a closed chapter in a book you can never reopen. Ahead lies Persia, the vast empire your father dreamed of toppling, the prize that is weighted like an unopened letter. You tighten your grip on the railing and imagine the words inside. The sea wakes up before you do tar, and salt and gulls with opinions sow when you step onto the dock at Sestos. The ropes are already creaking like old men settling into chairs. You run a palm along the plank of the nearest trireme and feel last night's dew bead under your fingers. The Aegean is a sheet of hammered pewter, and somewhere beyond the horizon is the long body of Asia. The place your father pointed to on maps, and you have not stopped thinking about since you learned to pronounce Hellespont. Army like a sentence subject, verb, object, teach clause lashed down with rope and discipline. Companions, hypaspists, phalanx, slingers, the little community of cooks and armorers and scribes who make war feel almost domestic until the trumpets sound. Mainstream historical fact climbs aboard with you in the spring of 334 BCE. You ferry roughly 30 to 40,000 infantry and some 5,000 cavalry across the Hellespont, a force leaner than Persia's but tuned like a string. Parmenion, your seasoned general, has already set up a bridgehead. Your job is to finish the sentence. You stand at the prow of your ship and let the wind flatten your hair. The pilot calls depths. The oars fall into their rhythm. Behind you, someone tries to whistle and gets scolded for offending Poseidon, which is a superstition you decide not to challenge on a morning like this. The current pulls west to east, tugging you toward the Anatolian shore as if Asia is impatient for the show to start. Halfway across, you ask the coxswain to cut the oars and let the ship drift. You take a spear from a guard, test its balance, and smile. The crew glances at each other because they know the story you are about to write. With a breath, you hurl the spear forward, and it bites the water with a hiss, striking just shy of the sand. Then bumping onto the shallows as if aided by an invisible hand, you say softly, a legal fiction turned ritual. Truth? We claim it as won by the spear. Historians still argue whether you actually threw a spear or merely leapt ashore with a flourish and a prayer. But every version agrees on the gist. You declare Asia not merely a destination, but a prize? Joke 1. You briefly wonder how customs paperwork handles conquest by spear. Then decide to let the quartermaster worry about forms. The beach at Abydos receives you with wet sand, and the familiar chaos of first steps men stumbling. Off gangplanks, horses snorting at waves that look suspiciously like enemy cavalry, officers shouting calm into the wind. You plant a small altar right there on the strand and pour libations to Poseidon and the local gods, 'cause partnership with the sea is best renewed at the door. Then, without much fuss, you point the army south along the coast toward Iliamtha. Older name sitting in your mouth like a memory you've never had? Troy. Whether it's the Troy Homer imagined, or the one archaeologists will later argue over sleeps, or low mounds and broken walls. You climb the ridge as sun rubs its eyes, and the wind tastes different here, like old bronze and baked dust. The temple of Athena stands worn but upright. You leave your armor there and take a set of sacred pieces to wear in its stead, because sometimes pageantry is strategy. Quirky tidbit, later writers insist you took a shield from the Temple of Troy that you carried in your battles henceforth. Some even swear it hung in your tent, a piece of myth you could grab when the day demanded drama, whether or not. The artifact was authentic. Your men feel taller when they see you glitter with Homer's borrowed light. You lead a small party to a low, grassy Mount Achilles barrow, they say, though the dirt can't answer for itself. You run a race there with your companions, because respect sometimes looks like sweat. Hephaestion lays a garland at Patroclus' tomb. You lay one at Achilles' and feel a boyhood echo ring through your ribs. The Iliad you keep near your bed comes to mind, the passages Aristotle marked, the places where anger ruins and friendship saves. You stroke the mound's grass with your fingertips and tell yourself you'll remember the differences. Joke 2. You consider leaving Achilles a note, any tips? The reply would be unprintable. Down in the plain, the strings of your army tune up camp rising with its usual choreography. Picket set, cook fires coaxed, horses picketed in rows like punctuation marks. Envoys from local Greek cities slip in, bow and pledge. Others hesitate because Persia's shadow still lies long in Asia Minor, and no one likes to change overlords too often in a single decade. You accept oaths with a smile that says both welcome and we brought pikes. The Persian satraps are not asleep. Spithridates of Lydia and Pharnabadzus of Hellespont and Phrygia gather cavalry and mercenaries near the Granicus River to test the rumor of your boldness. Scouts bring you news as crumbs. Enemy horse thick on the far bank. Greek. Mercenaries in Persian pay glinting like awkward cousins at a family reunion, the river running fast with snow melt. You taste the water yourself. Cold. Metallic. Annoyed and watch the current shoulder past stones, as if anything that enters it should think twice. Night falls, and the council fires sketch a ring along your ridge. Parmenion argues for patience. Cross at dawn? Find an easier ford? Let the men eat warm porridge instead of frog's air. You pace the line of flame and listen because you chose him to say exactly this. Historians still argue whether you were reckless at Granicus or simply read the moment better than cautious minds could. The sources split. Some call your decision rash, others necessary showmanship to stun Asia into choosing you. You decide quietly. At first light, or sooner, you'll test the river, not because you scorn prudence, but because this coast is watching. And Persia is listening, and speed is a language you've become fluent in. You lie down on your cloak, the ground still holding a little warmth from the day, and pull the old habits under your head, dagger and Iliad, that unlikely pair of bedfellows. The pages crackle when you shift. You trace a line Achilles rising at dawn and smirk, because dawn is exactly what you have in mind. Bucephalus huffs nearby, unimpressed by heroic scheduling. Joke 3. You promise him that if the river gets too enthusiastic, you'll let him do the swimming and you'll just supervise. Before sleep, you let your mind turn one last time. To the spear in the shallows, the garland on a mound, the cold edge of the Granicus. You've made the gesture, paid the gods, borrowed the glamour of a story older than your grandmother's songs. Now comes the part with mud and shouts, with eddies that want your ankles, with Persian nobles aiming long spears at a crown that still smells new. Asia has been greeted. Tomorrow it will be addressed more firmly. You exhale, the camp exhales with you, and a moon treads the sky like a careful messenger. When you close your eyes, the sea you crossed a few hours ago rolls behind your eyelids, and the river ahead lifts its voice to match. Between them, a narrow strip of sleep waits. You step onto it as you stepped onto the beach, sure-footed, lightly armored, and already leaning toward the far bank. Asterisk. The rooster does not wait for you to finish your dream. It yells somewhere down the slope, and the sound of hooves on damp earth follows close behind. Dawn is only a rumor on the horizon when you pull your cloak aside and feel the chill rush. In the Granicus River, steaming faintly in its channel below, you smell horse sweat, pine smoke, and that peculiar tang of metal from sharpened spears lined in a neat forest. You mount Bucephalus, shakes his mane like he's already bored of ceremony, and ride to the ridge. Below, the river runs broad and stubborn, its surface broken by rocks that mock your ambition. Across the water, the Persians glitter with arrogant set traps and fine armor, Greek mercenaries standing stiff as statues. Mainstream historical fact presses against your temples. Here, in May of 334 BCE, you meet Persia's western defense in your very first pitched battle on Asian soil. Outnumbered, yes, but isn't that the seasoning on every dish you've ever liked? Your generals gather like old crows. Parmenion insists again. Wait, find a softer ford. Don't fling youth against river and horse. You tilt your head, listening, and the firelight from his eyes makes you hesitate for one heartbeat. But speed is still the language you chose yesterday, and you're not in the mood to switch dialects. You glance toward the east, where light bruises the clouds, and you say, "We go in now." The companions, your cavalry, bunch around you, their horses stamping, eyes wide as coins. See Hephaestion among them, calm as ever, a steady pillar and a swirl of nerves. You remind the men with a grin that if they want immortality, all they have to do is not fall off their horses midstream. Joke 1. Easier said than done because slippery rocks do not respect heroics. Trumpets slice the dawn. Your line surges forward, iron-shod hooves splashing into the icy current. Water soaks your greaves. The force of it tries to twist ankles and knees. The Persians shout from their bank, raining javelins down like sharp raindrops. For a moment, the noise of water, hooves, and arrows all collides into a single roar. And you taste river mud between your teeth, and then you're through. The first crash of cavalry against cavalry smashes like storm waves. Horses rear, lances splinter. You drive your spear under the guard of a Persian noble and feel the wood quiver with the impact. All around you, dust and spray fuse into a choking fog. The Persians press hard, but your wedge formation cuts like a plow into their orchard of men. Quirky tidbit slips in. Some later writers claim your helmet plume was so bright and so ridiculous that Persian horsemen aimed at you just for the bragging rights of saying they knocked down the peacock. If so, they all missed on the flanks. Your Macedonian phalanx wades in, sarusses jutting like the bristles of an enraged hedgehog. The river, instead of a barrier, becomes a stage. The churned mud, locking everyone together in a mess where long spears prove decisive. The Greek mercenaries, paid by Persia, fight with clenched jaws, embarrassed perhaps by the cousins they now oppose. Historians still argue whether you personally charged into the mercenary line with reckless brilliance or left that to your infantry. But either way, the outcome rhymes. The mercenaries are crushed. The Persian satraps flee, and the river runs quieter by midday. After hours of slaughter, you call a halt. Refuse to massacre the surviving mercenaries, though. Later, you will send some back to Greece as a warning. The satrap Spithridates lies dead, along with many noble Persians who probably thought breakfast was still on schedule when they rode out. You stand at the bank dripping and realize you have cut the ribbon on Asia. This was the threshold. And you crossed it not politely, but with hooves, spear. In an audience of riverside reeds, your men cheer you, voices hoarse, eyes glittering with the intoxication of victory. You raise a hand, the gesture casual but heavy with promise. This is only the beginning. The spoils are divided, the wounded tended, the dead given rights. You pour libations again, this time to Zeus and to the river itself, because you've learned that rivers remember grudges. Joke 2. You whisper to the water, "Thanks for not tripping me in front of everyone." Pretend the current chuckles back. News gallops ahead of you faster than your own cavalry. Greek cities in Asia? Minor peel away from Persia like bark from old wood. Sardis opens its gates. Phissus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus are whispered destinations. Already your army marches lighter, because the map begins to fold itself neatly into your pocket. At night, the quiet after the shouting, you sit by the fire with Hephaestion and Parmenion. Hephaestion smirks at the day's madness and patches. A scratch on your arm with more tenderness than you deserve. Parmenion shakes his head, mutters about reckless youths and rivers that eat men whole. You nod and let him grumble, because he's not entirely wrong. But still Asia did not wait, and you are not going to let the Persians choose the schedule. As the flames sink low, you glance back toward the river. The moonlight paints it silver now, calm, obedient, almost shy. You know better. That water tried to kill you and your horses. But it also baptized you into the war you've always imagined. Tomorrow, you'll push deeper inland. Temples and cities ahead. Persian kings listening uneasily from Susa and beyond. But tonight, the Granicus is your lullaby, a rushing voice softened by distance, reminding you that one river down means countless rivers to go. Joke 3. You murmur to Bucephalus one day, "Someone's going to call me Alexander the Amphibious." And the horse flicks an ear as if to say he'd rather not. You lean back on your cloak, feel the stiffness in your shoulders, and breathe in the mixture of smoke and horsehair. Victory has a centicrid, heavy, strangely comforting. You let it rock you into sleep, the sound of the river behind you no longer threat, but steady rhythm. It's like a drum that promises tomorrow's march. You wake with the sky already spilling gold over the ridges, the smell of roasted barley and horse sweat mixing in the air. The Granicus is behind you now, another story for campfires, another name stitched onto the growing quilt of your legend. Ahead lies the sprawl of Asia Minor, a corridor of cities, temples, and citadels that still cling to Persian authority like ivy to an old wall. You mount up, the ground vibrating with the rhythm of thousands of boots, and set your gaze toward Sard. The march feels different now. Your men walk with lighter steps, the taste of victory still salty on their lips. They whisper to each other about how Persians fell, how the Macedonian wedge held like iron, how Alexander, yes, that would be Euroed at the very front. Mainstream historical fact threads through your thoughts. Sardis, one of the great satrapal capitals, collapses almost without a fight, its walls more eager to decorate themselves with your banners than with Persian insignia. You enter the city and accept its surrender. The Lydian nobles bowing low as if they've rehearsed the movement for centuries. Temples shine in the morning light. You pause to give orders that the sanctuary of Artemis remain untouched. A calculated gesture meant to coax Greek loyalty in these lands. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers insist that when you stepped into Sardis, the city's Acropolis surrendered keys with such haste that you barely had time to dismount. Imagine that. An entire citadel saying, "Oops, our bad." Before you even asked, the road south leads you to Ephesus. Its theater and marketplace greet you like an old Greek relative who has spent too long under foreign roof. You declare freedom for its citizens. A clever phrase that always seems to taste sweet but hides the aftertaste of, by freedom, I mean loyalty to me. Historians still argue whether this benevolence was born of genuine pan-Hellenic ideals, or simply a propaganda move to paint yourself as the liberator. Either way, coins begin to jingle, priests begin to pray in your name, and cities unlock themselves one after another. You notice, though, that not every gate swings open so politely. At Miletus, the Persian fleet lurks offshore, their sails like teeth biting the horizon. Your navy, cobbled together with Athenian allies, risks a clash that might have unraveled your momentum. But strategy whispers in your ear, Do not let Persia rule the sea. And so you fight, win, and watch as the Ionian coastline slips further into your grasp. Chakarnes proves stubborn. Its walls laugh at your siege engines. And Persian commanders Memnon and Aranabate spit defiance from behind the battlements. Nights stretch long with the thud of catapults and the smoke of burning towers. Your men grumble, sweat, bleed. You prowl through the camp, cloak thrown over your shoulders, reminding them that patience is also a weapon. Joke 1. You tell them that walls are just doors that haven't realized their career potential yet. Eventually, Halicarnassus falters, parts of it crumbling under pressure, though the Persians manage a partial retreat. Victory is messy, but still, it is yours. Your march pushes into Caria, where an unlikely friendship blossoms. Ada of Caria, a queen dispossessed by Persian overlords, adopts you formally as her son. Quirky? Absolutely. One moment you're a conqueror, the next, you're being tucked into royal family paperwork like some long-lost heir. But you accept because adoption comes with cakes, castles, and loyalty. And besides, having mom cook dinners for your army isn't bad for morale. The further you go, the more the land reshapes itself around your presence. Old satrapal palaces become your administrative seats, treasuries open like coin purses, Greek exiles return home under your banners. You begin to see not just battles, but governance forming in your wake cities, reorganized. Local rulers replaced with Macedonian officials, coinage struck with your symbols. Historians still argue whether you intended empire from the very beginning, or stumbled into it through momentum. But as you gaze over Asia Minor, you feel the weight of something larger than mere conquest. At night, in Ephesus or Miletus, or any of a dozen cities whose names now fall into your story like beads on a string, you sit by lamplight with Hephaestion. He asks if you ever imagined stopping here, ruling this rich coastline, living out your days with temples singing your praises. You smile but shake your head. This was only the first course. The main dish still waits further east, where Darius himself tightens his grip on the throne. Joke 2, you mutter. Besides, I've already promised Bucephalus a tour of every river between here and India. And the horse flicks his ears as if he heard. You pour another libation, this time to Poseidon for the seas you must yet tame, and to Artemis for the sanctuaries you've promised to protect. The night hums with distant waves, with the laughter of soldiers who still can't believe how far they've marched, with the crackle of torches that keep shadows at bay. You breathe in and feel the dust of Asia Minor in your lungs, a dust you've already begun to claim. And slowly, the realization sinks in. The Granicus was not just a battle, it was a doorway. Now that you've walked through, the entire Persian Empire stretches ahead, immense, glittering, and terrified. You settle onto your cloak, eyes heavy, heartbeat steady, knowing tomorrow's road will wind inland toward even greater storms. Joke 3. You whisper to yourself, Alexander the Great. Or Alexander the slightly overbooked. And drift into laughter that slides seamlessly into sleep. The camp fades into silence, horses snorting softly, stars wheeling high above. The Aegean murmurs beyond the hills, promising more campaigns. More cities, more restless footsteps. You exhale and let that promise wrap you like a blanket. The world is vast, but tonight it feels almost small because it lies under your eyelids. Waiting, the march slows now, not because the ground is softer, but because your mind allows it. The fires of camp have burned low, and the clatter of armor has given way to the quieter sounds of sleep. You lie there beneath the open sky, the constellations spilling their light in slow, deliberate patterns, as though they too are easing into a gentler rhythm. Your shoulders loosen. The weight of rivers, of walls, of satraps and mercenaries begins to dissolve into something lighter, almost like mist lifting at dawn. You think of the sea you left behind, the taste of salt, the endless horizon, and you let it carry you somewhere. Calmer. The footsteps of your men, so many thousands, fade into whispers, and those whispers drift further still until they are only the hush of a breeze. You breathe in steady and slow. With each breath, The dust of the march becomes softer. The scent of smoke turns sweet. The noise of the world shrinks into a lullaby. The horse at your side shifts once, then stills, as if he too has accepted the invitation to rest. Imagine the river now, not as a torrent to be crossed, but as a ribbon of silver light winding peacefully through the dark. Imagine its waters washing away the sharp edges of the day, smoothing them until all that remains is calm. You let yourself float there, weightless, unhurried. As the current carries you further into stillness, and as the stars settle and the night deepens, you give yourself permission to let go. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight belongs only to rest.